and welcome to this week's episode of Bob's Live, our weekly show here on the internet. And well, I see we've got some people watching. Hi, Donna. And before we get started this week, I wanted to again give you a little bit of an update. Of course, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And Bob's Live, it streams every Tuesday at 5 p.m. We're a little bit late this week. I had a little technical issue that I had to sort out. But we stream every Tuesday at 5 p.m. But also, over on our website, you can go to bobsmarket.com/live. And we're now posting each episode as its own individual blog post. So it gives me the ability to do something really cool, which is add in links to kind of supporting materials. So this week we're going to be talking about mums. So if you head over to bobsmarket.com/live, I've included links to previous blog posts where we've talked about fall mums. So that kind of gives you a little bit of more in-depth reading that you can do and kind of really help support the show with kind of some information to back everything up. And also, you can now subscribe there and get an email before we go live. So you can check that out. And as I said, the thing that I want to talk about this week is mums. So right now is kind of the peak of fall mum season. Our markets are just bursting with mums, and we've got a wide variety of collars to choose from. So I thought this week I would share some tips on caring for mums, but also some different ideas of ways that you can use them in your landscape. So let's jump over to my yard and take a look at a few different ways that I'm using mums around the house this fall. So last year I got lucky, and this gigantic mum right here behind me survived through the winter. And in previous episodes of Bob's Live throughout the summer, I've shown you how to trim a mum that survived through the winter to encourage it to bloom in the fall. And now we have it here in full bloom, and the petunias around it, they're starting to look kind of, but this thing, it is amazing. But today I'm going to show you a couple other mums that I recently purchased, that one I'm going to plant and the other one I'm just using as a display. But both of them most likely won't make it through the winter like I did with this one, where I just happened to get lucky with it. So let's go take a look at that. So this mum I have on a planter on my porch, and it's actually on a plant stand, and the way that I keep it from blowing over is I actually have this pot zip tied to the plant stand, so that way it can't go anywhere. And then also, to weight it down, I have concrete in the bottom of this planter. And normally during the summertime, I have a Boston fern in it. And what I do is I don't even bother planting the fern. I just take the hanger off of the hanging basket, plunk it down in, and it's good to go. So with this mum in the fall, I do the exact same thing. So I didn't even have to bother planting this mum. It's just sitting in here. So this is by far one of the easiest tricks that you can do for fall decorating. And you know, it kind of fills in this little opening here on my porch between the handrail and this column, and it looks fine. So I've said before that our deco pots make a great choice because the containers are reusable.
In fact, this container, it is about 5 or 6 years old, and I repot it every year. So back during the summer, like the front of my house, I had Dusty Miller and Impatiens planted in it. And what I'm going to do for this fall is just pop a mum in it. And normally I would change out the dirt, but since this mum is only going to be living for just a few weeks until we get our first hard freeze, I'm not even going to bother changing out the dirt. So I pulled out the old plants, I mixed up the soil a little bit, and I'm going to pop this mum in. And you know, it's a simple, easy thing to do that changes the look for fall. And I've actually probably got more dirt in here than I need. I'm definitely going to have a mess to sweep up. So this is a 9-inch mum pot, and something that you can do if you're getting ready to plant a mum like this is let the mum sort of dry out a little bit. So this one, it's kind of dried out just a little bit. I mean, the root ball is still fairly damp to the touch, but that makes it pop out of the container easier. And plus, you kind of want to let your mums dry out a little bit in between waterings. Pack it in good. And there we go. So we're kind of rotate it that way. I did it's kind of off center, but hey, it's going in a corner, that's fine. Something you do want to make sure that you do is when you water your mums, you want to make sure that you water around the base of them. They don't like to get the tops wet. One of the sayings that you can remember is a dry head, but wet feet. So that's something to keep in mind when it comes to watering your mums. Speaking of, let me go find a watering can. I'll water this guy and get it back where he goes. There we go, back into the corner where it belongs, right with his little gnome friend. So it'll look pretty good right up through into November. So as I said at the beginning, mums in our area, you kind of want to treat them as an annual. This one, you know, I just got lucky that it survived through the winter. Mums really shine as kind of a short-lived fall annual that give you that pop of color that you need right during the fall holiday season, kind of, you know, sort of Halloween into Thanksgiving, in that time frame, and right now here in September and early October. So if you have an area in your landscape where you have a plant that, you know, you planted back in the springtime, it might not be performing as well now, you could replace it with a mum and it'll look great for, you know, a few weeks up until we get that first really hard killing freeze. And mums, they also make a great choice for front porch decor and just filling in and decorating areas around the house to give you that fall feel.
Alright, so that is some basic mum care tips. And I've got a bright spot right there. Yeah, so when it comes to caring for mums, in our area, you kind of want to treat them as an annual. And Patty said that she lucked out and 8 of hers came back. So, yeah, even though we had that crazy ice storm last year, we still really had kind of a mild winter. And that meant that a lot of people that planted mums had them survive through the winter. So I got lucky with that one that it made it. And personally, I was already kind of planning into the springtime of kind of replacing that whole area. But because that mum survived, I just kind of planted around it. And it made a great kind of illustration that I could use uh, for Bob's Live. Um, so when it comes to taking care of mums, there's some different tips and tricks that you can do, but really they're pretty easy to care for. So mums, they take full sun, at least half a day of full sun. Um, in fact, when we grow our mums, we grow them outside uptown, and then we also have a small field down by the river. Um, that made me think of Chris Farley, like, you're in a van down by the river. But we grow some of them down by the river. Most of them we grow uptown, but we have them outside in a field. And that's because mums are daylight dependent. It's not until the day lengths start getting shorter that it triggers them to produce buds and to bloom. And another crop that does that, only it's not buds and blooming, it's a leaf color change, is poinsettias. So with our poinsettia crop, of course, it's getting into colder weather. We can't have them outside, so we have them in our greenhouse uptown that has a perfectly clear tempered glass ceiling. And that gives them the lighting conditions that they need in order to change color going into the Christmas season. So mums, they need full sun. A way that you can kind of extend your mum's bloom time and kind of the beauty of it going into fall. I said in the video, that they might last kind of up toward Thanksgiving. And that is if you take some steps to protect them from frosts and freezes. So if you have them in containers, you can bring them inside. If you have them outside, you can cover them with a blanket or a sheet or something if you know we're going to have a frost. And that'll help protect them and kind of prolong their blooming for a little while. Of course, if you do have them planted outside, once we get those hard killing freezes, that's going to kill them back. When it comes to watering them, if they're in a container, they need quite a bit of water, so you want to water them almost every day. Of course, this time of year, a lot of that depends on weather conditions. It's sort of like with springtime, too. If we have really, really hot weather, in the 80s or 90s, you definitely want to be watering them every day. If it's a little bit milder weather, it's in the 60s and 70s and maybe a little bit cloudy out like today, then you might only need to water them every couple days. And then if they're in the ground and you just planted them, you want to be watering them 2 to 3 times a week. That kind of helps get them established. And if they're an established mum where they've survived through the wintertime, rainfall should be adequate unless we're in like drought conditions. Now, I put an asterisk there beside established, and that is because, again, in our area, whether they survive through the winter or not is kind of a gamble. You have kind of a 50-50 shot of them making it. And a lot of it depends on, the main thing is how cold the winter gets. If we have extremely cold temperatures, and especially for an extended period, most likely is going to kill any mums that you have planted outside. However, if we have kind of a colder, wetter winter, um, I said colder, but sort of a cold, wet winter that's a little bit more mild, your mums might survive. But if you're planting them, the one thing that you can kind of do to kind of give them a head start is plant them early. So, kind of early September, like when we first get mums at the market, if you're going to try to overwinter them, if you want to try to experiment with that, that's the time to plant them. If you're planting them like right now, you might actually be a little bit too late. They're not going to have time to get a root system established before we get those killing freezes in the fall. So that's something to kind of keep in mind if you do want to experiment with kind of overwintering mums. Yeah, Patty makes another good point, and I should have done a whole other separate slide on attempting to overwinter them. She says hers are up against a house. So if you have them planted in kind of a protected area where they're up against a house and they're getting a little bit of warmth, especially if you have a house with a basement where the basement is warm, that'll help kind of protect the root ball and help them survive. And driving to work, I see a lot of mums that are blooming right now that are planted up against houses. And that's the case with those, is the warmth kind of trapped underneath the house in the winter has helped them survive. I don't know how in the world that mum that I had survived through the winter, because it's in a raised bed out very far away from my house. It's out next to kind of the street going past my house. So it was in probably the absolute worst conditions you could have had it in. And yeah, it didn't make it. So again, it's always a gamble in our area. The last thing is fertilizing. So if you do have a mum that makes it through the wintertime, you want to fertilize it about once a month with a water-soluble fertilizer. So something like Jack's Classic or a Miracle-Gro or something like that. What I use on the mum that overwintered that I grew this summer is I used Jack's. It's their all-purpose 20-20-20 fertilizer. So I hit it with that about once a month. Really just when I was fertilizing the rest of that flower bed. And, that works good. You want to stop fertilizing it, though, once it's setting buds and getting ready to bloom. Because you don't want to put more energy into growing more green growth. You want to put that energy toward it actually blooming. So once they start to bloom, that's when you want to cut back on the fertilizer and stop fertilizing them. And again, if you're going to experiment with trying to overwinter them, this is another area that's kind of up for debate. Personally, I leave the dead growth on them once they die back. I just leave it there. And it's my opinion that kind of helps them. Last year when we had that big ice storm, that mum, where I left the dead growth, it had kind of a layer of snow on it, and then it had the ice on top of that, and it basically formed a big empty dome around it. So I think that kind of helps to insulate it. There are some people, though, that say to cut them back and cover them over with mulch or straw to help insulate them. But for me, just leaving the dead growth on has always worked. And then kind of around March, April, you'll start to see little bits of green growth down inside. And that's when you can go in with some scissors and kind of trim out that dead growth. So yeah, these are some quick mum care tips. If you want to read a little bit more in depth about caring for mums, again, head over to our website at bobsmarket.com/live, and there you can find basically like episode notes for this episode. So I've included, I think, 3 previous blog posts that I've done about mums in this week's notes. And then I also have an ancient, at this point, kind of embarrassing video that I did on mum care, like probably 10 years ago at this point. So if you want to see a much younger version of me talking about caring for mums, yeah, it's over in the show notes also. So, well, that is all that I have for this week. And next week, we're not going to be having a live episode of Bob's Live. And that's because I'm going to be speaking at a garden club event. So for them, they're getting Bob's Live, I guess. Instead of doing a live episode of Bob's Live next week, I'll have a pre-recorded episode that I'll post. And if you sign up for the emails, you'll get the email notification whenever it goes out. But I've actually already got most of it recorded and ready to go. So next week, I won't be here live, but we'll be talking about planting pansies. So that's the other, kind of popular fall flower. Those are the 2 big ones, mums and pansies. And unlike mums, where you have kind of a 50-50 shot around here of them surviving through the winter, pansies are super hardy. They're definitely not pansies. They can survive down to 10 below zero. So in our area, you can plant them. They'll go dormant during the winter time, and then they'll kind of perk back up in the springtime and give you another blast of color in the spring. So next week, we're going to be planting some pansies. And, well, that's all that I have for this week. So until next time, keep growing.